Okay. And it says it is preparing, which I think means that we are streaming already, of course. All right. Hey, everybody. Kelsey Komorowski here, founder of Komo Consulting and the Framework for Academic Management. Welcome to our interview series on Skill Building 101. This is a series where every week I'm bringing on a different, very successful professional who is helping us understand how they charted their journey from high school to college to career. And today we are extremely lucky. We have Mike MacDonald on with us, and he is going to take us into his journey into authorship. Although honestly, Mike, I wasn't sure if authorship was even the right word because I know you've been published in so many different capacities. So maybe we can just start out, tell us a bit about what you do, maybe like top 2 or 3 career highlights, just to give us a sense of where you're at right now before we kind of rewind it back.
Sure, yeah. I think the way that I would sort of frame the profession that I've been in for the last 10 years or so would be content creation. So I've worked at the biggest newspaper chain in Canada, that being Post Media News. I covered an election with the CBC, the national broadcaster. Spent 4 years writing for The Onion, which is a satirical newspaper in New York City. I've co-authored 3 books, working on the 4th and 5th at the moment. I've done speech writing for like UNDP, a few other places. It's all just content, basically. And so the way that I got into it was essentially just through writing. I loved to read and I loved to write growing up. My mother was a librarian, so books were always very important. We'd go up to cottages and stuff like that and just read the entire weekend. And I was always a little resistant, but my mom was really good in that she found books that would really interest me in specific. So I would read like, the Hardy Boys, for example, things that I would enjoy, not, dense literature, not anything that was above my level, just things that I could quickly consume and sort of blow through so that I'd, engage with something else next and, find where my interests would lie. So growing up, there was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and my mother, being a librarian, would always have authors over to the house. And they'd always be conversing about the books that they wrote. And my mother would get like an author series at her library in which she'd speak to all sorts of different authors. I remember speaking to Robert Munsch when I was little and being sort of just blown away. So I think the seed was planted pretty early on. I think there's a big part.
Okay, and sorry, hold on. Just for any of our viewers who don't know Robert Munsch, little context.
Yeah, so he wrote The Paper Bag Princess. He wrote, he wrote a lot of great children's books. He actually
super famous author.
Super famous, Canadian, yeah, from Ontario. And he'd be really animated too when he'd go and he'd read these stories. I remember going to one of his readings when I was a kid and just being blown away at how he could just captivate the entire room with the stories. And the stories are very repetitive and they're very silly. And they usually get people to get very involved. Some of the writing that I've done, as an adult has been trying to sort of pick up on some of those tenets in terms of interaction and engagement. So I've been writing these books called branching narrative books, or, that's sort of the pretentious way of putting it. You'd say a choose your own. And I do that basically because, reading for long periods of time can be quite demanding, especially now with people's attention spans sort of diminishing a little bit. So the fact that you can make a choice and that you can flip to a page or whatever, it makes it very interactive. It pulls you in, similar to what he was doing with his audience in terms of all the calls and responses that he had in his books. Not to say that I'm trying to mirror him exactly, but there's certainly elements. So I guess, like a lot of people, I graduated from the University of Western Ontario.
Oh, wait, I'm going to even bring it back to high school just for a second, because from what I'm hearing here, there's this beautiful kind of backstory from when you were a kid, really, that kind of gives this really nice narrative to the career path that has unfolded for you. When you were in, high school before you went to university, was this something in your head you already knew based on those experiences of I want to be in writing, content creation, that type of thing?
To a degree, yes, but I was very shy and I would shelf everything that I wrote. And I would write. I'd write, I guess I was fairly precocious in that I was writing like spec scripts in high school. Because I had a friend's father who would write scripts. And so I would take one of the scripts and just copy the format.
Like a movie, like a TV script or like a movie script?
Like a TV script, movie scripts. I wrote something called Academic Probation with a friend of mine in high school. And I think we did try to pitch it to the CBC as a bunch of like 16-year-olds back in the day. And of course they didn't go for it. But most of the things that I wrote, I was so insistent that none of them were very good. And that if I did show somebody what I wrote, my reputation would be forever stained, which is definitely not the way to go about it. The way that you want to go about it is to be writing a lot, to be showing people a lot, to take the criticism, envelop the criticism, and then go forward again and again and again.
So I want to pause that for a second, because that, I think you've just touched on something that so many of our students are affected by. And I'm talking whether they're like in middle school to high school, and even a lot of our college kids, that idea, that fear of failure, perceived or actual, and that fear of judgment of like, what if it's not good enough? And how, like, it's one thing for us to say, you know, don't worry, right? Because we have that perspective of it really doesn't matter, you should do it anyway. But for somebody who's feeling a bit maybe paralyzed, or a bit like, I could never put myself out there like that, they're afraid to do that, any kind of reframes or mindset shifts that they could potentially make to help them overcome that?
I mean, it's tricky. A quick example, and I don't mean to be, you know, speaking off on a huge tangent right from the word go, but in the last 4 months, I moved to Montreal to write a TV show. And while I'm here, I've been taking French lessons, and I never did very well in French. And I always thought that I just didn't have an affinity for French. I thought that, you know, I'd never be able to speak, ergo it became a self-fulfilling prophecy in which I would never even try. But if you do try and you do put yourself out there, you can gain some fluency, and you just have to build. And it's like putting your work out when you're younger. If it is creative writing that you're interested in, you know, it might not go that well the first time or the first few times, but you get over that. You get over that feeling of rejection, and you learn how to deal with it. It's sort of like, you know, playing sports in some respects. Like, you are going to lose, and losing isn't fun. But once you know how to handle that emotion, it becomes much easier losing, and therefore you can probably be much more successful.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. I think that's super valuable. And that really is at the core of skill building, right? For most people, when you start out with something new, whether it's a sport or a language, or a lot of the skills that we work on, like critical thinking, time management, executive functioning, if you're not accustomed to using that skill, then it's not going to, for most people, it doesn't come easily, right? And that is absolutely normal. And that's 100% the starting place. But with practice, with persistence, with a deliberate kind of, I'm going to build this out, there, you can achieve anything. You can build out any single skill. And how would you say is your French right now then? Tu parles bien?
Oui, je parle français depuis 3 mois. Maintenant, c'est difficile pour moi, but it's coming along. And, you know, I wouldn't have been able to understand that sentence just 3 months ago, right? But I would say also, with regards to, you know, content creation, and with regards to just kind of like getting over yourself in some respects too, and this definitely factors in with studying, you know, you have to set realistic expectations. The idea that my friend and myself were going to have like a TV show at the age of 16 was farcical, you know, in hindsight. But at the time, it seemed like, okay, this is what we could achieve. The road to get there was like writing for my university newspaper, writing for various journals, writing blogs, and then, you know, sort of like scaling up, scaling up, scaling up. You have to build, I think what you want to do is you want to put one brick in place perfectly before you get the second and the third. And so you have to be realistic. So if you are, you know, like a struggling student getting low C's or whatever, try to get high C's, and then try to get low B's, and then maybe high B's, you know, and it's a process, and it will take you time. But to think that you can just, you know, do a 180 from like D's to A's is probably not very realistic.
Not at all. And in fact, that really sets you up for failure, right? Because to have such an unrealistic jump, like if you happen to get there, amazing, but to expect that, you're going to feel crushed no matter what. So that's really excellent advice as far as, and I love the getting over yourself, because again, like a lot of students are just like, I'm not good at writing or this or that. And there's super valid fears and to a large extent, like some stigma surrounding that. But to have that perspective of, I can get better and I will, and it's progress. It's not about getting really good at it right away. It's understanding that you'll get better at it bit by bit. And so to your point, Mike, if we shift then from high school to university, so this common track still that I want to get better at writing? Like, what did you go to school for? Where did you go to school and what did you take?
So I did an undergrad in political science at the University of Western Ontario. I still wanted to write, and I was the president or the vice president of the acting club. I wrote plays. I would rewrite Woody Allen plays, thinking that I had a leg up on him. So I was always very interested in it. I couldn't quite figure out how you would make that leap. There were still like a few missing pieces per se, but I was always very sort of inclined toward the arts. Although I didn't really study it formally as such, you know, doing politics, studying politics, I thought the path would be much more easier to just employment, to, you know, working for the government or something like that. I didn't think that, you could sort of write creatively for a living. Even though I had met people, it just seemed very, very difficult. And I was always daunted. And that idea that, I just wasn't good enough because I wrote things previous that, didn't get any traction and then got rejected, which again, in hindsight was to be expected because I was only 16, 18 years old. Of course, you're not going to be hitting, the peak of your powers at that age. It will take time. But then after that, I did a master's degree at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And I kind of wrote a bit of a goofy dissertation. It was on the political relevance of satirical news on first-time voters in the United States. And
okay, hold on. Just to, again, for some of our learners or parents even who might not know exactly what that means.
Okay, so like when I was writing the dissertation, I was looking at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. That was a big show back then. And it was sort of like satire, sort of like caustic humor sometimes, framed as political discourse. And oftentimes there'd be a lot of jokes to sort of explain a very complex political situation. And that really appealed to me. Being a poli-sci student and enjoying sort of humor and theatrics, it definitely resonated. So what I did was I reached out to The Daily Show and to a bunch of places for interviews, and luckily enough, they obliged. And then when I was reaching out to The Onion, yes.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to be interrupting, but you're just sharing so much gold here that I really want to highlight, because that's another big thing. Just, you had this dissertation you wanted to do. You had this idea. There wasn't like a roadmap in front of you for here's what you do, but you were like, I want to do this thing. How can I do it? And you just reached out, put it out there again.
Definitely, yeah. And I would say too, with the dissertation, I remember a lot of fellow students condescending to me, being like, I'm not sure if that's a real dissertation. But again, that's what I was interested in. It's like going back to the Hardy Book boys. You have to some degree, play to your strengths, and you have to do what you enjoy doing, because if you do enjoy what you're doing, it won't feel like, agony each and every day. Like you'll enjoy it, you'll want to do well. And I think that if you enjoy what you do, you'll be rather successful. And then there is also that thing of just reaching out and trying. And, the worst that somebody can say is no. And once you get over that, those no's, all of a sudden they mean nothing. It's just a temporary little roadblock that you have to work to get around. But if you fear the no in the first place, that might halt your progress altogether. So with The Onion, I was interviewing them to incorporate some information in my dissertation. And I gave them a bunch of jokes that I had worked on. And I knew that was kind of bad form. It was a little cheeky. And they said, okay, these actually aren't so bad. You could come and do an internship.
So were you looking for a job with them though? Or like, was that a purposeful, hey, look, I'm funny? Or
I was like, in what world could you possibly get a job at this newspaper? Back then it was actual physical newspaper. They just had got a website. And I didn't think that for me, I always thought it was so funny and so hysterical. Like, how could a bunch of people come up with this? And I always thought that it was like one or two people writing it. Turns out it's a huge collaborative process involving like 75 different writers. Oh. So again, had I known that, I probably would have been a little more easy on myself with regards to my expectations and my output. But you don't know those things at the time, right? So I went, and I remember my first week in New York, being fairly young and being intimidated. A lot of the interns there were from like, Harvard or Yale or whatever, and they had been writing for their satire papers. I remember distinctly feeling like I was not good enough. I felt like a huge outsider. I would pitch material, it would get sort of, torn down, which again was to be expected because I hadn't done this before. And I was dealing with people, some of the writers that had worked there had been there for, 20 plus years. So I would go home every night and I would practice my joke writing abilities. I would write endlessly for hours and hours and hours and hours. And over time, I sort of got it down. I got the voice down. I learned how to write in their voice. And I learned like efficiency with words and where to put punctuation to make things kind of silly. I started workshopping my material with other people at bars and cafes on the weekend in Park Slope in Brooklyn, until I finally pulled myself up to a standard. And then I got a contributing writer's job. They sort of pit all of the interns together for like 1 or 2 jobs. And it's like a 4-week sort of marathon writing session. And luckily I was one of the few people that pulled through, which was great. But then it became even that much more difficult. It's like, once you get in there, that can be difficult, but to stay is also very difficult. It's a very competitive sort of cutthroat atmosphere. Luckily, I managed to do that for about 4 years before the paper folded. And so they lost a bunch of ad revenue. And there's really only that outlet for satirical news. So it was a very specific skill set in some respects. So from there, I shifted to actual real journalism, seeing as though I was reading so much about the news to satirize it. I thought, oh, maybe I could write about this for real.
Question.
Yeah.
Okay, just before we move on to that next chapter, as far as the practicing joke writing, so and humor me here, Mike, like not actually pun intended, but like that skill set to do that. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? So it's communication skills, it's writing, it sounds like it's distilling. Was it your voice or like the voice that the publisher was aiming for?
I mean, the voice that The Onion has is a very sarcastic, dry AP voice. So it's learning how to write headlines. It's learning how to write things that are much more relatable to a broader audience. I think when you write about your own experiences, it can be very singular and very specific, and it might not translate over into a wider audience. So with me, what I would do, I would walk around with a notepad, and anytime I heard something funny or anytime someone said something funny, I'd write it down. So I'd have that sort of frame of reference, and then I'd try to build off of that. It was a process of writing, rewriting. It was also a process of like living life a little bit, to be honest, because when you're in your early 20s, what can you really say about heartbreak? What can you really say about financial insecurity? It's difficult. You're kind of just guessing. So it does get easier as you get older over time because you have that well to draw on. But for me in specific, it was just basically learning how to throw out a lot of my material. Like the kill rate that I had amongst myself was very high. I'd be writing like probably, it sounds absurd, but maybe like 200 jokes each week, and then whittling it down to what I thought would be the 10 strongest, and then submitting those in the hopes that maybe one of those would be picked up and I could work on a full story and sort of flesh out the article. And before that, I think I was a little bit lazy with it in that I thought, oh, like I'm funny enough, I can probably do this. And I sort of just relied and rested on my laurels of being maybe slightly humorous or whatever. And it just doesn't work like that, because the fact of the matter is it's a business. And like any business, you have to work pretty hard, there's just no getting around it.
That might be one of my favorite ever takeaways, I'm serious, of all time. So like the number of times I've heard, well, I'm never gonna have to use this, I don't want to do that anyway. And like a lot of our teens especially, it's like, I want to do a career in video games, or I want to do a career in this. And it's like, that's well and good, but understand that people who make millions of dollars playing and testing video games, they still worked really hard to develop a skill set that enables them to monetize their passion. And it's so important that you realize that no matter what you want to do, you think of your dream job, you're going to need to work hard and build out a certain skill set in order to have success within whatever field you do. And I think the examples that you just gave of that, writing hundreds of jokes a week, whittling it down, like that is such a deliberate and purposeful means of becoming successful in that specific field. Because on the one, even the other day I was telling, I forget who, that we were going to be chatting tonight. And they're like, what do you mean he got to write jokes for a living? Like, that's so like, what a great career. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding, no doubt. But you're confirming like even that though, to be successful in that field, it took a lot of work and a lot of very deliberate skill building.
Yeah, of course. Years and years and years.
Wow.
And it was fun and I enjoyed it, but there'd be many periods where I didn't want to do it, like any job, many times where you thought, oh, I'd love to do something else. But then you have, an article that maybe goes viral, or someone comments on the article, or you have a good session with someone else and you get pulled back into it and you get reminded why it is that you want to do it in the first place.
Yeah, I love that. So after The Onion folded, the next kind of jump, because that was your first job out of LSE, right? Out of your master's?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then where'd you go after that? Did you have something lined up? Did you know this was coming, or were you like, oh my God, I'm out of a job?
Okay, so I should say, like I've been saying this entire time, writing is a lot of failure, unfortunately. There's no one that just writes things, it all gets published and it all gets sold. So I left The Onion to work on my own television show on Rogers. We shot one episode. It took a year to write the episode and to film it. And I think we were like going over budget and we were getting in a little bit of trouble. They were going to, I recall, do like a full season of episodes. The first episode came out and it was on television in Canada. And I had little viewing parties and I felt like quite the little hit. And then I got a call saying it was canceled. And, it happens. There's budgetary issues, there's sensibility issues. So I was a little disappointed with that. But then after that, I worked at a new startup, which unfortunately also folded, just for, the internet is difficult, obviously, and CPMs, like the rate of advertising money you get, has constantly been going down. And to sort of figure out how to monetize content online is quite difficult. And that was sort of the early days of doing that. So from there, I went to, I started my own little online publication for maybe a year and a half, in which I lost a bunch of money, just trying, but it's fun.
Anyone who's listening, Mike is not trying to dissuade you from pursuing a career in writing. He's just charting the adventure that it can entail.
Yeah, there's highs and lows, peaks and valleys, definitely. But from there, I met some of, my very best friends. I met my writing partner. It was a tremendous experience. I had an apartment at Bloor and Ossington in Toronto, and probably 4 days a week, I had 10 different university students come in to intern in my apartment as we were, trying to pump out these articles and trying to amplify them on social media. It was truly a lot of fun. And that in some respects, that failure, whatever kind of failure it was, led to success of being asked to join Post Media News, the largest newspaper company in Canada, or at least was. And so I started being sort of like full-time columnist, sort of slice of life writer for them, which was a great job. That, lasted for 2 years. I learned a ton there, paid very well. I enjoyed it. I worked with some very, very smart people. Every day was fun and exciting because every day, the narrative in politics or in life changes and you have to write about it and reflect about it. Again, a lot of hard work, it has to be said. I think I was writing maybe 2,000 to 3,000 words every day. And I would spend my weekends pre-writing articles so that I didn't feel like I was falling behind during the work week. I left to go to Journalists for Human Rights in Africa, in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And when I was there, it was great. It was fun. I started writing the shape of kind of a book. I involved a friend and we got a publishing deal to write 3 of them, which we did over the next 3.5 years. And I've been lucky enough to get a few other deals, so working on a few other books and other content. It's like I said, it's mostly all writing, but it all kind of falls under this umbrella of content creation because you don't know exactly which medium your writing is going to fall into, whether it be a newspaper, a TV show, a podcast, a YouTube video. Writing is really, truly a great skill to have if it's well honed, because it can be just so applicable in so many different industries and so many different fields.
Well, and I would even go as far as to say, think of a field, a job, an industry where strong writing skills would not be an asset.
Of course.
Right? Like, can you think of one? Because I can't off the top of my head. And no matter what you're doing, that's a fundamental ability to communicate is key. And we know that writing also reflects critical thinking, right? So
and I will say too, not to disparage anybody, but when you open up an email and it's poorly written, you probably have 1 or 2 thoughts about that individual, right? It can negatively bias who it is that you are if it is very, very poor and sloppy.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't say that's disparaging. If anything, that's really necessary feedback, even for a lot of our high school or college kids. And it's it's fine. I'm young. I can be a bit sloppy. And it's if you want to associate with that, that's fine, right? No judgment. You can do that, but understand that's how you come across. Understand that is the quality that you are bringing to bear and that other people see you as. And that's your decision to make if you want to be like that because you're young. But I think most people don't choose to be associated with negative qualities.
Of course, yeah. If you open up an email and the person is extremely articulate and the email is formatted well, grammar, syntax, spelling is all spot on, you'll probably have a pretty high opinion of them.
Absolutely. And I think too that speaks to one of the funny things about skills, because I think a lot of people, and this isn't just students, this is a lot of adults and just people in general, that they conflate the ability to the technical ability of writing, for example, or reading. Just because you know how to write doesn't mean that you know how to communicate, right? Mm-hmm. Just because you can write an email, to your point, doesn't mean that you know how to properly write an email or write an email that will actually get the result that you're wanting. But you can still write, right? Same with reading.
Yeah.
Just because you know how to read doesn't mean that you can critically engage with the text and actually get something out of it that you're meant to get out of it.
Of course, totally.
Yeah,
I think that's very true. And I would say too that most good writing, foundations of good writing are based on reading. And you do have to formulate these habits of reading a little bit each day. I know sometimes watching YouTube videos or whatever is just much easier thing to do. But if you can get into a little bit of a habit, and if you can incorporate a little bit of your day each and every day to read something, it will make your writing that much sharper.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks so nicely to some of our students who might have some resistance around like, I don't want to do any extra work like outside of school. And it's like, that is, again, that's fine. That's your choice. But understanding that even honestly, like 15 minutes a day extra of just focused reading something, it can be anything that interests you, to your point earlier, but doing just that little tiny bit, even honestly, 6 minutes a day, like you can set a timer, but starting somewhere and having and starting to put those blocks into place, like you were saying, is that can truly make or break the kind of paths or the doors that are open to you, right? Because you do 5 minutes a day for a year, you're going to be a much stronger reader, writer, communicator than somebody who didn't do that.
Yeah, I remember specifically at The Onion, there was one guy who I thought was hilarious, and he was also probably the hardest worker. And he went on to write for Stephen Colbert's show, and then he went on to start Rick and Morty, which has been hugely successful. And I looked at him and I had so much respect for him, and I thought, okay, how can I emulate this guy? And I looked at his behaviors and his patterns, and it was reading the newspaper first thing in the morning, being very well informed, staying late, working hard, writing. I mean, it's no fluke when you see people doing very well in life. You have to work for it, and you have to sort of identify key traits, key behaviors, and key practices, and try to emulate them as best as possible. The expression that everybody has is you have to fake it until you make it. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Absolutely. And that also makes me think of the saying, success leaves clues.
Yeah.
Like, and reaching out. And that's something like, if you're high school, college, young adult, just like trying to find your way, if you have an idea of what you want to do, and like find somebody in that field, literally go on LinkedIn, do some research, find somebody who's doing a job where you're like, I want that job, and figure out what they do. Right? Like, Mike, I think that's that exercise that you went through with that guy that created Rick and Morty, which is, I think everyone, if you don't know that show, go watch it immediately. That's brilliant, right? It's like, why try to reinvent the wheel? Look at somebody who's doing it and then just follow suit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's super resourceful.
Yeah. Try to demystify whatever it is that you want to do as much as possible. Try to get as close to the thing that you want to do as possible. And then just try to, gain as much information and figure out the logistics of how to make it happen. And then be dogged in your pursuits and be persistent. You'll probably fail until you don't fail. And then you can, and then, you're living the dream.
Yeah. And so as an entrepreneur, I super empathize with that sentiment. Fail until you don't fail anymore. Yeah,
exactly.
That's that to cultivate that relationship. Like, I just think of so much heartache that even I underwent, and that I know a lot of my friends went through when we were younger, right? In our late teens or early 20s. But to have had that perspective of failure is going to happen, fail fast, fail often, until you're not having it as much, right? Or until you figure out that path, whatever the success that leaves clues is for you.
Yeah. I don't want to come across as like a sports coach. I feel like I'm speaking cliches now, but it does not matter if you get knocked down 99 times. What matters is if you can get up 100 times. Because, it's like a war of attrition. You win over time so long as you're persistent.
Yeah, that's so true. And also, just for anyone listening who this might sound scary, being like, I don't want to get knocked down 99 times. Like, I'll get knocked down twice and I don't want to get up again. And that's totally normal. But I think to understanding two things. Number one, and Mike, you made this point really beautifully earlier, the beliefs that you have around failure or around trying out something that you feel you're not good at, those are choices, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's not an objective thing where it's, you're not good at that. And that's the way it is. Like, you can always choose to, I'll get better. That's one thing, is that it's very much your choice about how you want to see failure, as a good thing or a bad thing or not. And the other thing is that I would argue that your life is going to be a lot more interesting and a lot richer for trying different stuff out, even if it scares you, even if you fail, and to kind of just get creative and have a bit of fun with trying to figure out a different way to achieve your goals.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that if you're probably not failing, you're probably not trying that hard. And it's like anything, you learn from your mistakes, and it just makes you stronger all around. Yeah. So there's going to be a period, and you have to recognize that there is going to be a period in pursuing anything where the first part's going to be very difficult. And until you sort of know the lay of the land, and you have the vocabulary and you have the skill sets down, it's going to be tricky, but it just gets easier and easier.
Yeah, that's such excellent advice. So Mike, just if we're zooming out a little bit, so where you are right now, you've written these, the 3 choose your own adventure /misery books.
Yes, correct.
Correct. You're working on, is it two more of the same?
Yeah, so no, it's one more of the same. And then it's another book. It's sort of like a rags to riches story set in Central America. It's it hasn't been bought yet. The fourth Choose Your Own Misery has been bought, and yeah, still working on a few other productions. One production right now has potentially been panned, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. But these things happen. And yeah, I think right now I'm not sure what you're doing, but I'm just trying to use this time. I'm trying to get a routine going so that I have a level of consistency with work wherein I get up and I do a certain amount of things before I take lunch. I tutor some of your clients, which is great, in the afternoon. Just trying to keep, consistent. It is much more difficult right now to write, I have to say, because the focus sometimes, just isn't there with everything that's going on. And that's okay too. It's okay to have a few days or whatever where you're just not as productive as you would like to be. I know with a lot of millennials, we've sort of been raised with this idea that we have to be hyper productive at all hours.
Oh my God, yeah.
And, that right now can be a difficult thing to do, especially, if you're socially isolating, if you're with one or two people, or if you're by yourself, it's difficult. There's a lot right now to be intaking. The news can be kind of scary. So I think you have to be kind to yourself in a moment like this and just let yourself off the hook a little bit if your productivity isn't what it used to be. But also know that there is some time to do some productive things. And right now is a good time in terms of, just getting some work done, getting some writing done, schedule it first thing in the morning before you open up the newspaper, before you, terrify yourself or whatever. Yeah. So that, I guess, in a nutshell, is the world of a content creator. And I will say too, like, I'm just trying to be as transparent as possible. I did move to Montreal to write and direct something, and it was a really nice payday, but unfortunately that also didn't see the light of day. So there is this notion too that when you get to a place, everything will continue to be gravy. Also not true, like ebbs and flows. You just have to be persistent and just try your best.
Yeah, that's so key. And I think one of the terms that you have in spades here as a result of that, just being persistent and continuing, is resilience. Like, if you hadn't had those earlier failures that actually ended up being kind of like this foundation on which now you have this very, like, you come across as so secure with, like, I know where I stand. This one thing didn't work out. I'll be okay and try another thing. Like, that's huge. That is a survival skill.
Yeah, I would say, and to anybody out there that writes or that is doing anything, I think what you want to be doing is you want to throw a few things up against the wall and see which thing sticks. And the thing that sticks might not be the thing that you thought would stick, but then you can pursue that. And if you keep doing that, you'll always have options.
Yeah, so true. So Mike, let me ask you two final questions.
Sure.
First one, reflecting back, because we hit on a lot of skills and a lot of mindsets and attributes, but what would you say is the number one thing that led you to where you are, or that led to those kind of peaks in your personal and professional life?
Well, I think wanting to work creatively, wanting to indulge my imagination, wanting to be able to sort of just, I guess, express myself was always very important. I've always been fairly loquacious, always enjoyed talking. I thought that monetizing that would be difficult. It can be and it can't be. But I guess, just being true to myself, because I've had a few other little jobs that I haven't mentioned that I have done, and they pay really well or whatever, but they haven't been that fulfilling and that meaningful, which is okay as well. Like, money's money. We all need jobs. But I don't know, this might sound a little pretentious, but like, I would like to do something that is rewarding and meaningful. Also why I really like to tutor as well. When you can help people and you can help pull people up and you can see, the smile on their faces when they get a great mark, it feels great for me too. Yeah. To sort of, from what I've learned, to be able to pass that on to other people and to see them incorporate that into their lives is very rewarding and very fulfilling. And as much as possible, I would like to try to keep working in such a manner that I feel fulfilled. And I feel that the work that I do is representative of myself, as well as it being meaningful to others.
Wow. I'm going to be clipping that audio and just broadcasting it out. That's so good, Mike. Thank you so much. And I want to highlight on that point too, when you're doing something that is authentic, that brings you real, genuine joy, you are more likely to be successful at it. Like you might fall into a job that you're good at, that you don't love, that makes good money. And again, like that's all well and good, but to have that real connection, that spark where you're like energized each day for whatever you're doing, is pretty special, I think, and definitely more conducive to success than feeling like, I got to do this. Okay, so Mike, last question for you. Moving forward then, and especially now we're in the midst of the world is upside down with this pandemic, but what is one skill or one mindset that you are actively trying to build out right now, or that you hope to start building out in the future?
I mean, I'm trying to build up a language skill set right now, which is quite difficult. Outside of that, another skill set that I'm trying to build up.
Well, and I'm sure, sorry, the irony of learning French, being in quarantine in a French-speaking place is a bit ridiculous.
It is, totally. Unfortunately, the French school that I went to, everything is being put on hold. So I have the Pimsleur's French that I walk around the city with by myself, listening to and sort of repeating out loud. People looking at me quite funnily. Another skill set that I think outside of French that I'm trying to build on is I enjoy working collaboratively with other people. And I want to keep doing that. So I'm reaching out now to a few people whose work has inspired me to see if there's any potential synergy. Writing can be a pretty solitary pursuit a lot of the time. And it is nice to work with other people. You get a certain fusion of ideas. You have like a X idea and a Y idea, and they create a Z idea that you couldn't come to independently of yourself. So I'm trying to reach out to grab a few more of those ideas right now. And that involves, putting yourself out there, asking people to follow you on Twitter so that you can send them a DM, and then talking about a potential synergy. I'm sure you might come across as like a crazy person for the first few convos. But then, things normalize. You get to know the person over time, and you get to figure out whether or not you and that person would work well together. So I would say, in specific, I'm trying to collaborate a little bit more with other content creators.
That's fantastic. And I wish you the best of luck with that. I know anyone would be extremely lucky to be able to work with you. So just right before we sign off, Mike, tell our audience the names of your books so that they can go check them out because they're hilarious.
Oh, sure. Yeah. One is called Choose Your Own Misery, The Office. The other is Choose Your Own Misery, Christmas. And then the third one is Choose Your Own Misery, Online Dating or Just Dating. The conceit is for this Choose Your Own Misery series, you get to pick basically your destiny within the book, but whatever decision you do make, ultimately you do fail, and you're rerouted back to the beginning of life, to the beginning of the book rather, which is in some respects very true to life.
Yeah, I love that. And so just to make sure I'm not plugging a product that's woefully inappropriate for like grade 10s, what is the age barrier?
Yeah, probably 18 plus.
Okay. So if you're 18 and older, if you're one of our parents or one of our college students, go check out Mike's books. They're good for a laugh, which we could all use right now. Mike, thank you so much for coming on tonight. There are so many gems that you shared, so valuable. I know for so many of our students, especially, a lot of that is going to land. And above all, living, breathing proof that you can have a career in being funny. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of skill, but alas, it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for having me, Kelsey. Much appreciated.
My pleasure, Mike. All right, take care. And you guys, thank you again for tuning into our Skill Building 101 interview series. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.